welcome to this week's Deep Dive. My name's Honor Criswick. I'm a meteorologist and presenter here at the Met Office. This is my first Deep Dive of 2025. If you haven't seen the first one of the new year, make sure to check it out. That was with Aidan, talking about some of the data and also some of the new graphics that you're going to be seeing on Deep Dive videos and also in other videos too. For today though, I'll talk you through some of the UK weather. It's fairly benign, particularly if you compare it to last week with all the snow and the ice and the quite sharp frosts and the very cold temperatures that we saw last week. Definitely seeing something a bit more quieter this week and also much milder too. We're also going to talk a little bit about what's happening elsewhere across the world. There's a named storm in Europe. There's also a tropical cyclone that's made landfall across eastern parts of Mozambique. And also, of course, it's been widely in the news, the wildfires that have taken place across parts of the US. And I have actually managed to get a guest in to talk about that with you today. That's with Nick, one of our chief meteorologists, so make sure you stay tuned for that. Firstly though, let's talk about UK weather. So to start off with, as always, we'll take a look at the bigger picture. I'm just going to turn on the kind of air mass temperatures that we're looking at, because you can see already we've got high pressure just to the south of the UK, quite a strong jet just to the northwest too, but generally on the southern side of the jet, so much milder air, particularly after the very cold week that we had last week. I think it was welcome for some, dragging in this kind of mild air from further south, but quite a cold plume just further west out towards Newfoundland. That's going to become quite interesting as we head into next week, this kind of cold plume fueling the jet, perhaps bringing quite widespread unsettled weather towards the UK for the end of next week. But for this week, generally high pressure holding on, particularly across southern and central parts, giving actually quite a lot of settled weather. Unlike last week though, that high pressure, we actually saw quite a lot of sunshine across southern and central parts. This time though, a bit more cloud mixed up in this high pressure, more moisture, so we're going to see quite a lot of low cloud at times during the week, some quite foggy conditions, a chance perhaps we could even see some fog warnings issued into the week. So it's not that high pressure that we all know and love. I'm afraid it's going to be quite a cloudy high. But there is going to be some sunshine at times. I'll just turn this off and I'll run this through. So largely most of the sunshine is actually going to be towards areas further north. Northern England, parts of Northern Ireland at times are going to see plenty of sunny spells. Also to the lee of high ground, we've just discussed this before on Deep Dive. So the lee of high ground, we can get some breaks in that cloudier weather. It's not going to be completely dry across the board of the country. We do have, you can see here, these moving in, these frontal systems moving in at times. So for most of the week, the bulk of any wet weather is going to be to the northwest, perhaps western parts of the UK at times too. And also you can see a good squeeze in the isobars at times here too, as well, as that high pressure eventually sinks its way off towards the continent there. So at times the northwest, yes, it's going to be a bit windier here. Also see some outbreaks of rain and drizzle, but kind of starts and stops, patchy at times too. So on the whole, there's actually going to be quite a lot of dry weather around, but as I say, quite a cloudy high. And it remains fairly similar as we head towards the weekend too. But sort of second half of the weekend, we start to see a bit more of a transition period, so that high pressure's moved away towards Europe, and that's just allowing a few more frontal systems to clip into western areas, perhaps bringing a bit more unsettled weather towards more of the country as we head into next week. But as I say, for the bulk of the country, there's going to be lots of dry weather around as that high pressure holds on to start with. And another thing you'll notice, if I just split the week up a little bit, I'll move it onto Wednesday so we can see what's happening for the beginning of the weekend. But you can see most days are fairly similar. It doesn't change too much. You can see as we head into tomorrow, once again, as I've sort of mentioned, those frontal systems moving into the northwest, bringing in some outbreaks of rain, also some strong winds here at times. Fairly similar on Thursday too, but you can see there are some breaks in the clouds. So on Wednesday, once again, Northern Ireland, northern parts of England, parts of Scotland should see some sunshine, but across sort of southern and southeastern areas of the country on Wednesday, quite cloudy, perhaps quite low cloud and murkiness at times. Fairly similar on Thursday, though not quite seeing as much of that sunshine. There's a bit more of a kind of slice across northern parts of the UK, and once again to the lee of high ground across Scotland, likely to see some sun sunny spells. And that cloud, once again, Friday, perhaps a bit more widespread, similar on Saturday too. Once again, that frontal system moving into the northwest. But there will be some sunshine around, is what I'm trying to say. Also, lots of dry weather, but it really depends on your location as to whereabouts we're going to see that sunshine, as I say, also to the lee of high ground. Also, some quite strong winds at times to the northwest of Scotland. Sort of easing as later on to Friday, but picking up once again on Saturday. So that's another thing we'll have to keep an eye on. But on the whole, the weather across the UK is fairly similar, fairly quiet as we head into this week. An interesting thing is with temperatures. So once again, I'll just move this towards Wednesday so that we can see Saturday on there as well. So we can see on Wednesday, very mild for the time of year. I think average for the UK is about 7 degrees Celsius, I think. Slightly lower for Scotland, probably more towards 5 or 6. But we can see on Wednesday across the country more 9s, 10s. So it is going to be mild for the time of year. Fairly similar into Thursday, but we can see there are some areas that are starting to dip, more 6s and 7s. And then it's as we head towards the weekend, you can see particularly across the southeast, in some areas highs only around 3 to 4 Celsius. So by the time we get to Saturday, it is going to be feeling chillier, particularly across the far south and southeast. And it's also going to be quite cloudy. We could see, if we see some breaks, particularly, we could see some frosty conditions, but it's going to be fairly localised. But by the time we start the weekend, quite dull, quite chilly, not kind of like the conditions that we had the weekend before, where there was actually quite a lot of sunshine around. It was still pretty cold, colder than this in some places, but there's not going to be quite as much sunshine around, I'm afraid. But we can see as well across the temperatures for the UK, it's the northwest that really holds on to that milder air. So yes, it's going to be windier here, wet at times, but this is where it's going to stay mildest. Even as we head into Saturday, still could see highs of around 8, 9 Celsius. But this is where we really do hold on to that mild air. And it was across the north of Scotland actually last week that was quite interesting. We got down to, I think it was minus 18.9 Celsius. That was in Altnahara during Saturday morning. That's the coldest temperature we have seen since 2010. But 48 hours later, the temperature actually rose by 30 degrees. So there was a big temperature difference across Scotland. So, and this is the area where we're really holding on to that milder air too. So temperatures have really been up and down if you take into consideration last week too. But on the whole, if I can see if I can get up some graphs view across London. Let's see if I can get this right. Bear with me. See if I can get this going. There we go. Didn't click on the right button. So for example, areas further south, you know, we do hold on to that milder air for a time, but as we head into next week, temperatures do lower, but it looks like they do start to rise again as we head into the new week. But for example, over the weekend, it looks like we could see some quite chilly temperatures here. For example, lows of around 2 Celsius across the south. But as I say, further north, largely holding on to that milder air. Temperatures not changing too much, perhaps by a degree or two. And once again, those overnight temperatures milder again also. So as I say, the weather kind of for the UK, fairly benign, mild, particularly in the northwest, but it looks like we could start to see some chillier weather as we head into the weekend. But as I say, it's going to be quite cloudy. Across the world, so if we head over to Europe, for example, if I'm just going to turn off this and turn on a few other features, there we go. So you can see this area of low pressure developing across central parts of the Mediterranean. That's actually become a named storm by the Italian Met Service, Storm Felix. Yep, they've called it Storm Felix here. And we could actually see some quite heavy rainfall, some quite high rainfall totals, some quite strong winds at times. Also a little bit of snow too as we head into this week. So a chance we could see some disruption across parts of Europe. It looks like the bulk of the heaviest rain is largely going to be across eastern parts of Sicily, Sardinia as well, for example. Could also see some quite high rainfall totals. Peak of the event, we could see around 300 millimetres here, so definitely a chance we could see some disruption as a result of this storm. Could see some thunderstorms as well, where we do get the kind of heaviest rainfall totals, and we could also see some snowfall at times too. So for the Atlas Mountains, for example, across parts of parts of Algeria, and also some snow across the highest points of Italy too. So there is definitely a bit more weather going on if you take a look across the world. And once again, hopefully this isn't making you too dizzy, if I move further south, just going to turn those off because they look a little bit strange. Just zoom this in. There's also, oh, that's not working. There we go. Well, we can see there's also a tropical cyclone which has made landfall across western parts of Mozambique. Once again, heavy rainfall, some quite strong winds. I think yesterday it made landfall, wind speeds around 85 miles per hour, 100 miles per hour gusts. So some impacts here. One we have kept an eye on, it wasn't that long ago, I think it was towards the end of last year, we saw tropical cyclone Chido also really impact areas here. I think it was Mayotte, which saw, total destruction of some villages here. So one we've been keeping an eye on. This looks like the track of it is just going to move through the Mozambique Channel and probably intensifying a little bit more as it does so. I'm just going to check my stats here. So it looks like as it does intensify, we're going to see wind speeds perhaps around 100, 120 miles per hour. Largely moving through the Mozambique Channel, though. It could affect a very small island, island of Europa, I believe it is, a small French territory, but it's very small area here, not many people there. A very small chance as it moves its way southwards, it could just clip the far southwest of Madagascar. Here we could see some quite heavy rainfall. Once again, very small chance we could see peaks of 300 millimetres here, but it looks like at the moment widely 50 to 100 millimetres. A chance we could see 100 to 200 millimetres across obviously an area that's normally fairly dry. So a chance we could also see some impacts here. If I go over to, this is from Meteo France. So this is the track so far, this more black line, and then this green and red area here. This is the track that it looks like it's going to start to move through over the coming days. So it looks like it is largely going to avoid southwestern parts of Madagascar. I think there's a less than 20% chance that it could make landfall here, but it's generally going to sweep past, but it's still going to bring those strong winds and also those heavy outbreaks of rain. And I've also actually got a satellite image here. This is from earlier today. I think you can see it. It's just the eye of the storm here, and you can see this area of clouds swirling round. So quite an intense storm here. Looks like it's going to intensify as it moves southwards across the Mozambique Channel, and then it'll eventually decay across the southern Indian Ocean. So, a couple of things going on around the world. And another thing, of course, which I'm sure you've seen in the news is the wildfires across parts of LA, causing lots of destruction here. There's still fires going on at the moment, all caused by a number of things. The Santa Ana winds. We've also had some very wet weather here, and then also some very dry weather. So lots of vegetation has grown. That's all dried up and has caused and basically acted as fuel for these fires to intensify. And also the topography of the area has been an added factor into these wildfires. There's still some going. Winds have eased off a little bit, but it looks like they're set to intensify a little bit more as we head into the coming days. Wind speed's not quite as strong, but there is obviously the wind speeds are going to pick up, further fueling and moving these fires along. So I was lucky enough to convince one of the chief meteorologists, Nick Silkstone, to come in and chat to me about that. So I managed to chat to him earlier. So let's take a look at what he had to say. Okay, hi Nick, thank you for joining us today. First deep dive of 2025.
You're very welcome.
Yeah,
Here we go.
Yeah, I feel like maybe some of the audience might recognise your face. But yeah, thank you for joining us today. We're going to be talking about the wildfires. I'm sure many of you have seen in the news all the destruction and devastation that this event has caused. And one of the key players in this event is actually something what we call is the Santa Ana winds. So can we start off by a little explanation around what exactly those are, Nick?
Of course, we like to name many winds of the world, don't we?
We do, yeah.
And this one's actually named after a settlement or a range of mountains in the far south of California in the southwestern USA called the Santa Ana Mountains.
Yeah.
And it's a frequent, dry, hot, northeasterly wind that blows across this region. It has various peaks and troughs as you go through the year, but it tends to be sort of like an intermittent feature from around October to March, most winters, across North America. And Santa Ana, the region itself, is just a prime location for basically flow through these mountain passes and over the mountains, and it produces a very strong, locally enhanced and dry wind on the downslopes, basically along the Californian coast. But although Santa Ana wind is used in the press, locally there are many more terms for these winds. For example, the San Bernardino Mountains are probably the feature that caused the winds that exacerbate the fires around Malibu and some of the ones most frequently seen in the media over the past days.
Okay. Right, okay, and obviously it was the Santa Ana winds which was sort of one of the key players in the events that we've seen over the last few days. And can you talk us around the kind of general weather setup that we've seen that's resulted in this kind of this wind flow?
So it's a very localised name, Santa Ana, but the actual pattern that leads to it is much faster.
Yeah.
So essentially, across North America in the winter half of the year, as I said, October to November, if we have surges of cold air, we tend to get high pressure that builds to the east of the Rockies and results in an area of higher pressure across the Rockies itself in this area called the Great Basin. This is the case that we had here, so big high slap bang of this part of the world. In the winter, they're quite cold, which sort of reverses the difference from summer, where the high terrain is actually relatively, hot compared to the marine areas elsewhere. So we often end up with lower pressure to the southwest of the high, down across the Pacific coastline of California. That produces this large pressure gradient from high to low, from northeast to southwest across this region. So we know that in the northern hemisphere, winds rotate clockwise around highs, and generally rotate they do rotate anti-clockwise around lows. And this event, I say, although the highs often build when you have this cold surge, was made ever more notable by something we call an upper trough that generated a deeper than normal area of low pressure just actually to the south of California. It was nearer the Baja California Peninsula in this case. So there's a big pressure gradient. Northeasterly winds are pushed down from the Great Basin in this region. They hit the Sierra Nevada mountains, which are much higher than these two ranges we've talked here, and they basically act as a block on the flow. It's not able to ascend and go over there, so it's forced to divert and find basically the gaps and the lower part of the terrain to flow through. So these purple lines are Mayagur indicating where the wind was going. Think of them as like streamlines, and where they're packed together, as in the case moving through these mountain passes just to the south of the Sierra Nevada, they're forced to accelerate and the wind speed increases. But then we've got little sort of ripples in the flow. You can imagine pebbles or little weirs, in some bit of the stream. The San Bernardino Mountains and their various passes that run through them, and the Santa Ana Mountains here. And basically, I've got this little zoom in of the topography you can see within this, approximately this box that I've drawn in here in the southwest, with the reds being the higher topography and the blues being the lower topography. And here is our flow around the Sierra Nevada. Here's the San Bernardino range in reds, and here are the various little gaps and passes. You could probably see is where the roads and rivers and various little bits of pieces run around it. And the flow is forced through here like channeling through a gap. You could think of that as like the Bernoulli principle, where if you force flow through a smaller gap, constrict it through a pipe, the pressure lowers and it has to speed up. And there's also mountain wave type effects that can lead to strong downslope flow. And a way to visualise that is like the flow of water trundling along, hitting a weir in a stream, and it's forced to, say, go from what we call a subcritical to a supercritical depth, and it flashes down the lee slope of it and speeds up as well. And both of these factors in various paces came into play. And it was there in very much an extreme on probably the 8th of January, which was the really strong wind day during this event.
Yeah, and this is where this satellite image down here, just to bottom left, is as well, where we can see the kind of smoke plume, can't we, around the area.
This image was taken on the 10th, I believe, so a couple of days. So the fires had ignited, grown in that place, and it's mapped on the same area you can see. But these plumes you can see emanating down towards the southwest are basically sourced from the points of where the very sort of strong or severe wildfires were burning, and then been displaced by the ambient wind in that direction. Hence, what you'd expect with the Santa Ana winds continuing, although not as strong as on the 8th, which make the containment of these quite a problem. And there's one more thing about these winds, like as well as the air being forced to accelerate through the gap, it comes down from an area of very high terrain in the Great Basin, down much closer to sea level on the Pacific coast of California. And when it descends, it's compressed, so it warms. Imagine if you're compressing air in a bicycle pump, And also, because it's warming, the relative humidity doesn't gain any more water vapour, so the relative humidity, the relative amount of water vapour in it, well, the amount of water vapour is the same, so the relative humidity drops. So you end up with a very hot, very dry wind down there, which is great for, drying out any last remnants of moisture in any vegetation or anything that could be a fire source. And then also, if a fire does ignite, the strength of the wind is really fanning the flames. It provides oxygen into that fire to help it grow and become very intense, and also allows the fire front to progress very quickly, as opposed to light winds where it would, be much more stationary.
Yeah. And obviously, we have this kind of Santa Ana wind setup, as you sort of mentioned, as the air sort of flows over, it's drying out, we've got quite low relative humidity, but it was also the weather kind of in previous years, and also the lead up to the event, we had quite a wet season where all the vegetation was able to grow, and then it went really dry, didn't it?
Fuel's such an important thing for a wildfire risk, and some of the worst wildfire seasons we've seen around the world, for example in parts of Australia as well, have often been preempted by a wet spell, a season or two prior to that.
Yeah.
Again, the case here. So this is looking at the statewide precipitation rankings for the entire US through the whole of 2024. So I can explain it. There's 130 years in the data set.
Okay.
Basically, within that 130, how wet was this year? And 130 would be the wettest year in that data set.
Yep.
You can see we're 101 across the statewide area of California. So in the 130 years, there were only 29 years that were wetter than 2024. Yeah. But you can drill down into that. This is some commentary that they provided at the top, and you can see it says the year started out relatively wet for much of the region because we had the strong El Nino in the Pacific, and that's associated with atmospheric river events into California. So they had an incredible snowpack last year and a much wetter than normal winter into the spring this year. But then beyond that, as the El Nino subsided, you can see the second half of the year has been dry, and they've even had drought development and expansion across that region. So vegetation that grew in the spring, and the early summer will have since dried out, possibly died due to the developing drought, and that leaves a source of fuel. They say once you add the meteorology into that, it's potent if you get ignition of a fire.
Yeah, exactly. So it almost had the perfect ingredients, didn't it, to sort of create such a quite magnificent event kind of thing.
I forget the exact statistics, but it's something of the order of a decade or more since they've had such a marked, strong Santa Ana wind event in that area of Los Angeles. So around 10 years since we saw anything of comparable strength to the events on the 8th, which was the absolute peak of the winds.
Wow. Okay. Yeah. So obviously the general setup, the Santa Ana winds, obviously, and the topography of the area, and also. Kind of looking ahead too, there's a chance that we might start to see these sort of. The winds have lightened off now, haven't they? But there's a chance they could increase a little bit more, but not quite to the extent that they were a few days ago. This was the event on the 8th itself, the exceptional day. So, sorry, the coastline's not clear, 100% clear on this, but we're looking at California here. This is the Los Angeles region down here, and where you can see the colours, the brighter the colours, or the purples to reds as you go upside, equals the stronger winds. And on the 8th, we had, as we described before, high pressure up in the Grace Basin. In this case, the low was across the Gulf of California, but we had that very strong pressure gradient. You can see it was blocked by the Sierra Nevada, funneled through the gaps, and then the localised topography enhanced it further. On the 8th, we were looking at, mean wind speeds, even modelling at global model scales in excess of gale force. They reckon, 80 plus mile per hour gusts on the ground. I should say that the pattern of high pressure up here and lower pressure down here is maintained through this coming week, but the strength of the two, or the strength of the gradient between the two, is much weaker than it was on the day of the 8th when the fires erupted and spread massively. So Santa Ana winds will continue, so dry, hot winds, unfortunately, with very low humidity in this part of the world. And although they're not going to be as severe as this, there's now 4 large wildfires burning, and they're still going to be strong enough to make it a challenge to contain such wildfires. So it's going to be challenging for firefighting through the next few days, at least in that part of the world. And then longer term, looking at the patterns through the coming week or two, again, the pattern across the US suggests colder air over into the east of the Rockies once again, which tends to lead to higher pressure here, which is favourable for further, incidents of Santa Ana winds as we go through into the latter part of January. Yeah, not a lot of rain on the cards either to sort of help out with the fires that are already there. No, it's
a dry part of the world. We're going, it depends who you look at. I think the Americans have just declared a La Nina. The Australians have yet to.
Okay.
But that has the opposite effects often for California and suggests, drier winters during La Nina type conditions.
Yeah.
This part of the world, very little, if any, precip is signalled during the coming week or so, I'm afraid.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for talking that through, Nick. You did a much better explanation than I thought sure I would have been able to do, so thank you so much for that. And obviously here at the Met Office we'll be keeping an eye on things. I'm sure there'll be much more in the news, and obviously our thoughts go out to those who have been affected. But thank you, Nick, and I'm sure we'll get you on here again soon since you're so good at explaining things. But yeah, otherwise, let's move on. A big thank you to Nick for taking time out of his day to chat to us around the wildfires, and I hope you enjoyed a bit of a look around some global meteorology today, as the weather's fairly quiet across the UK. If you want some more content, well, there's actually a new video by Alex Deacon. We can put the link here so you can check it out straight away. Talking about, if you've ever wondered what exactly we're talking about, he talks through synoptic charts and what the different frontal systems mean, and he goes through all of that, and it's a really interesting video. I've watched it myself, so make sure you do take a look using the link. Otherwise, that is it for today. I hope you enjoyed this video. Give it a like if you did, share it around with your friends, and if you have any questions or comments, do leave them and we'll take a look, and we can even answer some questions you may have on the live on Friday. That's at 12:15. That'll be with me and also Alex Burkhill. So yeah, if you do have any questions, I'll take a look before Friday. Leave them in the comments and they may be answered during the Weather Studio Live. Otherwise, that is it from me. I hope you have a fantastic week, and I'll chat to you again soon.